Ruth. I'm working here at the Central Asia program. Welcome to the Central Asia program and to our monthly seminar on religions in wider Eurasia. I specify for those who don't know, this seminar is part of our Central Eurasia Religion in International Affairs initiative, which is funded by the Henry Luce Foundation. And today I'm extremely happy to have Mr. Vincent Artman, who is a PhD candidate at the Department of Geography at the University of Kansas. His research interests include role of religion in the modern public sphere, and his current research focuses on the intersection of Islam, national identity, and collective memory in contemporary Kyrgyzstan. In addition to his work on Central Asia, Vincent has published on the territorial and geopolitical space of passportization in Abkhazia and South Ossetia in the journal Geopolitics. And today, Vincent will present his research, actually his PhD research on, the topic he's working on, and the topic he will talk about today is negotiating identity in Kyrgyzstan, nationality, Islam, and the meaning of tradition. And I'm also more happy to welcome him that he's just spent a long field trip, 5 months field trip in Kyrgyzstan. So we're looking forward to hear about your research. Thank you very much, Vincent.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming out. It's quite humbling to see so many people here to listen to me talk. I'd like to also thank the Central Asia Institute for inviting me, especially since our initial emails, as I recall, I was pretty bad about replying on time because I was traveling around and things. So, but here I am. So as Sebastian said, my name is Vincent Artman. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Geography at the University of Kansas. This is a portion of my dissertation research that I'll be presenting today. I think the title is fairly self-explanatory: negotiating identity in contemporary Kyrgyzstan, nationality, Islam, and meaning and tradition. So again, I come at this topic as a geographer, and the kind of subfield of geography of religion is one that has been kind of in decline for quite some time. A lot of this has to do with sort of the prevalence in social science of the modernization thesis, learners' Mecca or mechanization slogan from 1964, and Roger Stump, a geographer who does study religion, has summed up sort of the general sentiment that religion is really nothing more than cultural flotsam produced by more fundamental social and political forces. And I think that in many ways this has resulted in a diminished vocabulary for geographers, certainly, and other social scientists as well, when we talk about religion. One article that was published by a couple of fairly prominent geographers defined religion in the North Caucasus as, they just defined it as nothing more than attendance per year at places of worship, which to me seems a bit reductionist. So I think that's sort of where the discipline has been at. There have, since the 1990s, been some developments. It's still a relatively small field. And when we're talking about Islam, much of the geography that has been written about Islam has really been about diaspora populations living in Western Europe, the United States, or Australia. Relatively little of it is about the Middle East, and very, very little is about Islam in Central Asia in particular, although as these books show, I'm sure everyone's more or less familiar with these volumes, other disciplines, particularly anthropology and history and political science, have been a lot better in this regard, treating the subject with, I think, the attention that it deserves. So I'm coming in as a geographer trying to fill a small gap. And one of the things that we often run into in the literature is this slogan, and it's not just, is this working? I guess it doesn't really point on there very well. This slogan that we often run into, that to be Kyrgyz or Uzbek or Kazakh or whatever means to be a Muslim. I mean, you find this all over the place, but oftentimes what it means to be a Muslim is not really explained very well. Or, in my opinion, it's explained in ways that leave a bit to be desired. So, Michael Riefkin in 1990, in his Moscow's Muslim Challenge book, that, again, most people are probably familiar with, he says the word Muslim does not necessarily denote a religious person, but rather somebody identified as a native of Central Asia, not a settler or a Bukharan Jew. More recently, David Radford has said that Muslim is really just a marker of ethnicity and national traditions, rather than a reflection of an individual person's adherence to Islamic religious belief and practice. This sort of leads, again, you see this in a lot of the literature, conceptualizing religion as basically a building block of national identity, and national identity is always seen as sort of coming first. And particularly in the Soviet context, or the post-Soviet context, and people sort of internalized Soviet categories for understanding what is a nation, it's almost a checklist of different, the costume, the language, the cuisine, the national poet, whatever. Religion is often seen in similar terms. Are they Muslim? Are they not Muslim? I mean, think of Ajarans in Georgia. They're basically the same as all other Georgians, but they kind of got set aside because they were Sunni Muslims. That wasn't seen in religious terms, it was just sort of a checkbox that differentiated them from other Georgians. And I think that this sort of discourse sort of desanctifies religion in a way. It treats religion as not something that's particularly sacred or religious. It treats it as something like language or costume. And then finally, I've done a little bit of research and presented at a couple of conferences on this idea of securitization, the idea that Muslims in Central Asia and elsewhere should be understood as being security threats, and we think about it in terms of terrorism and all these kinds of things. And at the other end of the spectrum, there are a lot of people who try to rescue Central Asians from this idea that they're all terrorists by really downplaying Islam and saying, well, they're all really heterodox and lax about their religion anyway, so there's nothing that we really have to worry about because they're not crazy fundamentalists like these people over here. And I'm not, again, really sure that these are the best ways to approach this topic. So the project that I've been working on was in the field again for 5 months, from about the middle of August to the middle of December, on an IREX Individual Advanced Research Opportunity Fellowship. My primary research site was in Bishkek and sort of the locality around there, although I did take trips to Karakol and Talas. This, of course, is the famous Dungan Mosque in Karakol. It's beautiful if you get to go inside it, and they were really happy to let me go inside. The methods that I used were primarily qualitative in nature, so I did 30 semi-structured interviews on themes like Kyrgyz ethnic and national identity, Islam, culture, and so forth. Excuse me. And I recruited people at first primarily through key informants, but from there, more of a snowballing method. People would recommend people or contact other people. And of course, pure luck. Sometimes people would see me interviewing other people and they'd come up and say, hey, you want to interview me too? Sure, absolutely. And I think it's important to note here that because this project was very focused on ethnic Kyrgyz and their views on national identity and religion, that I used a purposive sampling method. It's not representative. I didn't go out of my way to talk to Orthodox Slavs, for instance, or even Uzbeks, although I did talk to one Uzbek and a Dungan and a couple of others. But I really focused my research on Kyrgyz. Finally, I did some observations at mosques, Islamic schools, mazars, which are, if you're not familiar with the phrase, it's a holy place. I attended a couple of retellings, or partial retellings, of parts of the Manas epic, which I'll talk about a little bit more. And, of course, when you're doing this kind of work, just doing eyes and ears work, walking around, looking and listening, and learning what you can just by sort of immersing yourself in a situation. This is an Islamic school right outside of Bishkek. That's the head. They were all very nice and happy to let me talk with them. So, part of what I'm interested in is not just how people practice religion, but how in the contemporary world do people who are religious see their religion as influencing their national identity. And we've all heard that nations are imagined communities, but I think that they're also remembered communities, and I think in Kyrgyzstan this is absolutely the case. Who we believe that we are is shaped by who we believe that we were. And who we believe that we were is always a product of our sort of cultural memories. And these memories can both be hegemonic and at the same time be contested. So that, one of the critiques of the idea of cultural memory is, well, does every Kyrgyz person have the same idea of who they are as a culture? Well, no, probably not. But there are many cultural touchstones that still make sense to most Kyrgyz people, even if they disagree on the meaning of those things. So for many people, they told me, Manas was a Muslim. And we know this because he was killed while he was reading namaz, while he was praying. Congar Bai stabbed him in the back while he was praying. He's a Muslim. Other people said exactly the opposite. Manas was not a Muslim, and he could not have been a Muslim because the epic itself predates the spread of Islam among the Kyrgyz. How could he have been a Muslim? This was added on later. Each of these, as we'll see, each of these interpretations really implies something very different about what it means to be a Kyrgyz person and a Muslim in Kyrgyzstan today. And I think it really serves as evidence of what Jan Osman said, that the truth of a given memory lies not so much in its factuality, but in its actuality. How is it performed and enacted in everyday life by real people? Whether Manas was or was not really a Muslim, or even if he actually existed, is in some sense irrelevant, because people believe that it is. Many people absolutely feel that Manas was real, and that he either was or was not a Muslim. And I think this kind of helps us see things in terms of what John Hutchinson said, nations as zones of conflict. And Hutchinson, in his book of the same name, was trying to reconcile the ethno-symbolist view of nations, which sees nations as modern, but still embedded in historical memories. But at the same time, recognizing that nations are not homogeneous, that they're fractured, and people dispute what the nation is and what they mean. And the reason that I talk about Manas, and one of the things that I focused on was the Epic of Manas, is that in many ways, I think Manas is kind of a nexus for a lot of these cultural conflicts that are happening within the Kyrgyz nation, between Muslims, between ethnocentric Kyrgyz nationalists, between the state. And so it was a really convenient sort of organizing point for me to look at. So of course, building the Kyrgyz nation itself has not been an easy task. Prior to the Soviet national delimitation in the 1920s and 30s, national identity among the Kyrgyz had not really developed. They saw themselves as belonging to other categories, whether religious or tribal or family, maybe as nomads versus settled. But nations, I think in the sense that we understand nations today, I don't think had really developed. And so when the Soviet Union collapsed, suddenly there was a Kyrgyz nation state. And that territory that was, populated by that titular population had really only developed in those terms in a Soviet context, which, as we had mentioned before, sort of reified the checklist of different national traits. And so the independent Kyrgyz nation state had to more fully articulate what it meant to be Kyrgyz in the contemporary world. And that meant turning the Manas epic into sort of an ideological charter in some ways. It meant rehabilitating things like nomadism and other quote-unquote backwards traditions. If you flip through this book, actually, they really take a pretty dim view of nomadism. But of course, Islam as well was seen as being a backwards holdover that hopefully in the future would be completely eradicated. And so the independence opened up a space for conceptualizing the role of Islam in Kyrgyzstan as well. This was partly necessary because, again, as most people are probably familiar, during the mid to late 1980s, there was a sort of Islamic resurgence throughout Central Asia. Sometimes this is seen as being very geographically uneven. So Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, of course, are usually seen as sort of the epicenters of this, whereas you know, the more formerly nomadic places like Kyrgyzstan were seen as being a bit more ambivalent about Islamization. And in 1999, a scholar wrote an article called "Looking for Islam in Kyrgyzstan," and he said, "Walking down the streets of Bishkek, one feels only the cold wind of scientific atheism blowing in your face." Okay, I mean, he was there then and I wasn't, so. But whether or not that was true in 1999, I don't know if it's necessarily true today, and I think that the development of national life has really opened up a space for religious discourses as well. This was taken at Osh Bazaar. It's just one of many carts where people were selling things like prayer rugs and skull caps, perfumes, prayer beads, all kinds of Islamic literature, mostly in Kyrgyz, some in Russian, but not so much. And again, there's many of these. And Kyrgyz are exploring various and oftentimes competing forms of Islamic piety, as we'll see in a moment, as well as some other religious movements, Tengrism, this idea, you know, sort of notion that there's a new religion being built up on sort of these ancient Turkic beliefs, Christianity, of course, secularism, and others as well. So when we say to be Kyrgyz means being Muslim, it's kind of hard to understand what exactly we mean. That sort of secular, cultural, or even atheist Islam, where it's just, well, I'm a Muslim because I'm a Kyrgyz, but I don't really pray ever or anything like that, and I drink, and I maybe go to Sierra Coffee and eat a hamburger that has pork on it. Those people exist, certainly. But the question is, and you read about that a lot, but the question is that really the only or even the best paradigm for understanding the relationship between Islam and Kyrgyz national identity today? I would say maybe not. And for many people, how they define and understand their religion is really intimately connected with the ways in which they define and understand their national identity, and vice versa. And it's not just a latent cultural trait. People take it quite seriously. So I think there's a need to really unpack what we mean when we say to be Kyrgyz means being Muslim. There are competing narratives, I think, within the country, and I put these two things in quotes because I want to make sure that I'm not giving the impression that I'm trying to divide them into two strictly divided opposing camps, because they're not. There are definitely tendencies that I think are fairly evident, but there's also a lot of crossover between them as well. So you have traditionalists, broadly speaking, who would argue that Islam and Kyrgyz traditions, such as visiting mazars, going to these holy places and praying, visiting traditional healers, seeking divination or spiritual intercession from saints, among other things. A lot of people, traditionalists, would say that these things and Islam are not at all in conflict. What I would call textualists, and I don't want to use words like fundamentalists or whatever because that's got a lot of baggage, but textualists, I think, would argue that a lot of these traditions are not really part of Islam. They're much more focused on what's in the Quran, what's in the Sunnah. In many ways, they represent more transnational, modernist views of Islam. Tablighi Jama'at in Kyrgyzstan is the clearest example of this today, but they're not the only one. And again, I don't want to give the impression that these are two groups that are really battling it out. In most cases, they don't really do much more than accuse the other side of just being confused. Traditionalists, like this woman, would say these mullahs, they say that we go to these places and we pray to rocks and we pray to trees. And that's wrong. We don't do that. They don't know what they're talking about. We go to these places because they are holy, because they've been blessed by God, and we go there to pray to God. And the textualists would say, well, that's not really Islam. And because of the Soviet times and people didn't get a good Islamic education, or today people get bad information off of TV, they just don't know what they're talking about. And all we really need to do is educate them, and they'll be better Muslims. So it's not like they're fighting each other or there's battling in the streets or anything like that. It's more, they just accuse each other of not really knowing what counts as real Islam. But what it really comes down to is this question of are indigenous Kyrgyz traditions shirk, or denying the oneness of God, or bid'ah, basically undesirable innovations in Islam. And we already went through these. And the question that arises is, are the traditionalists who believe that these are not shirk or bid'ah Muslims, or are they not, according to the textualists? And so there's this, at the heart of this, a question of what is the relationship between Kyrgyz traditions and identity and Islam. Interestingly, there are also fairly different sacred geographies associated with this as well. That's, of course, the central mosque in Bishkek. This was taken in August. I'm sure that it is significantly more complete than when I took this picture at this point, but this is a gigantic new mosque that's being built by Turks with Turkish money just northeast of downtown Bishkek. Supposedly going to be able to seat between 10 and 15,000 people. This is something relatively new for the northern part of Kyrgyzstan, at least. You don't necessarily see these giant mega mosques before. I mean, even the Bishkek Central Mosque is a relatively modest building, and this area out here is sort of a covered area that's been added onto so that it can seat more people out of the sun. This is another giant mosque that's being built just off the campus of Turkish Minas University. You can see this one's a little bit more complete, but again, it's really quite large. You go to any small village, this is the village of Aral, and any village will have a fairly new, relatively ornate mosque, and as you're driving along, you can always tell that you're going through a new village because there will be another mosque that you've passed by. And some people actually complain, there's more mosques than schools in some of these villages, and that's not so good. Aral actually has at least one more mosque. This one is a bit smaller and less ornate. It looks a little bit more disused to me, but I don't know. But as you can see, that's basically the village, and it kind of goes off a little bit over there. So this is not a big village, and it has at least 2 mosques. However, right around the corner from Aral is a mazar. This is Zulpukor, which is from the 12th or between the 12th and 14th centuries. Obviously an old mausoleum of some sort. And people go here to pray, to circumambulate, to pray for healing, to pray for good luck, to pray for intercession from the saints, and so forth. And a lot of the people who would go here would also visit the mosque, but many of the mullahs might say, going here and praying and giving bread to the shaykhs and these kinds of things, that's not really Islam. But the people who would go here would say, well, that's Kyrgyz custom, that's what we do, that is Islam. And we'll see, I have an interesting quote later that actually defines real Islam as coming and doing this, and the other side not so much. This was a map, a picture I took of a map that the Aygene Cultural Research Center, they put on a conference called the Sacred Geographies of Kyrgyzstan, and they brought in all of these different shaykhs from, shaykh is a guardian of a mazar, and they brought them in from many of these different mazars throughout Kyrgyzstan. You can see that there are lots. I think they said there were over 1,200 of them. A lot of them are Islamic sites like the Zulpukor. Some of them are sacred groves or rocks. You can see a lot of them are clustered around Lake Issyk, which has a very deep spiritual meaning for a lot of Kyrgyz. But you can see they're really throughout the country. Of course, famous Barani Tower, not built by the Kyrgyz, but it has the status of a mazar. Many people will go here on their weddings, because they believe that going here and praying or reading the Quran before their weddings will bring good luck to the marriage. These people here were actually Japanese tourists who were very nice, but you can see in the background there's a woman actually wearing a wedding dress. Happened to be lucky enough to be there to take a picture on accident of them while I was there, so interesting moment. This is the Baitik Batir Mazar, juxtaposed against the mountains, and of course, again, the mountains and gorges and places, wild places, again, often have a great spiritual resonance for many Kyrgyz. There's another view of the Baitik Batir Mazar on a different day. And people will often come here and pray, leave offerings. The day that I was here, people did exactly that. And there's sort of benches here, and people will go pray up at the door and sit down and read the Quran or something like that. Of course, this is the mausoleum of Manas. We'll be getting a little bit more to Manas in a moment, but another very sacred place for many Kyrgyz, not just for Muslims, but for people who follow this sort of amorphous body of Kyrgyz customs called Kyrgyzchilik, will often come here. They will say they've seen Manas in a dream or something, and they need to come here to pray or to read the Quran to heal themselves or get good luck or whatever. Interestingly, and I didn't know this before I went there, this rock and that rock, which are right behind there, are also mazars. And people will go here and pray as well. This sign basically says, please don't take anything away from here. Don't try to chip off a piece of the rock and take it home, or anything from the mausoleum either. So you can see that sort of nature-oriented sacred places and Kyrgyz-oriented sacred places and Islamic-oriented sacred places oftentimes are in very close proximity. And of course, the mausoleum itself is in the middle of the Manas Ordo complex, which is this gigantic place that was built by this Kyrgyz state. Lots of statues of Manas and his friends, and a large museum about Manas as well. And it's sort of, in many ways, a focus of the state ideologies surrounding Manas. The state has also gotten into the business of building mazars as well. This is Atabeit Mazar. It's rather new. This is a site where they have uncovered evidence of mass repressions from the 1930s. There's a museum here devoted to the mass repressions, and this is, if you go and look down on the top of the steps, there's an open pit that evidently was where they uncovered a mass grave. And I went here with several mazar sheikhs who were invited by Aigine, and they came here and they read the Quran to pray for the souls of the dead. Interestingly, this place also has the graves of all of the people who were killed in the 2010 revolution, and they're sort of being consecrated by being at this holy place as well. So I've mentioned Manas a few times, and it's very important to kind of discuss what the role of Manas is, because it's very much tied up with sort of the current understandings of what it is to be a Kyrgyz. So since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the independence of the Kyrgyz nation state, there have really been two dual inclinations in Kyrgyz nation building. One is sort of summed up by one of former President Askar Akayev's favorite slogans: Kyrgyzstan is our common home. This idea that Kyrgyzstan is a civic state, and Uzbeks and Russians and Kyrgyz, we can all get along and live here too. But there's also been a fairly marked tendency, again, not too surprising given the context, toward Kyrgyz ethnocentrism and sort of building a state around the titular nationality, which is a holdover from the Soviet period. And Manas has really been mobilized for both purposes. So although Manas is strongly identified with the Kyrgyz, at least since the 1950s, and there's kind of a whole history behind that as well. But it's also been mined for lessons on national unity and patriotism, interethnic cooperation, and all sorts of other things. I happened to be walking past, this is of course the big statue of Manas in Alato Square, the central square, and on this day there happened to be a bunch of military recruits, many more than are in this picture, and there was some sort of general, and they were all standing up and presenting themselves and getting medals and things. And I don't think it was quite an accident that they decided to hold this right at the statue of Manas when they probably could have done it a lot of other places. But Manas is very important because it's, again, been used as sort of the center of this state-focused nationalist discourse. But Manas is also an oral tradition, and oral traditions really tend to preserve mostly those things that tend to be important culturally or meaningful to a particular audience. And so, you know, when we hear that the Kyrgyz were lax Muslims, or that, you know, Islam rested lightly upon the nomads, or these sorts of stereotypes, I think that's kind of belied by the fact that the epic itself is replete with references to Islam, and that wouldn't have made sense to superficially Islamized Kyrgyz people. And many people, anytime I brought up the question of Manas, people in Kyrgyzstan would say, Manas is the encyclopedia of the Kyrgyz people. You cannot study the Kyrgyz and understand anything about us without Manas, because it contains information about life cycle rituals, birth and death, marriage, and all these sorts of things. Religion, including but not necessarily limited to Islam, different martial, artistic, and athletic traditions, and of course, as Askar Akayev has reminded us, Kyrgyz statehood, territoriality, and attachment to the territory of Kyrgyzstan itself are things that people have drawn out of this epic. And this means that Manas itself, the epic, the historical or legendary person, has become sort of the focus of contestation and negotiation, and an awful lot of overlap between these different sides. And again, I don't want to make it sound like they're all just battling it, you know, out to the death. But you have, you know, state discourses, ethnocentric discourses, which sometimes are less than happy with the idea of Kyrgyzstan being our common home, and Islamic discourses as well. And all of the sides lay claim to Manas and Islam and mobilizing them in different ways. So here are some quotes that I pulled out. The deputy qazi of the Bishkek Central Mosque, definitely somebody whom I would put into the textualist camp, to use that sort of framework. He told me, Manas is our history, our hero. He followed Islam. And another young mullah who I met, who also was very much on the textualist side of things, told me that, and I had interviewed him, and I thought, this guy's not going to have anything to say about Manas, and we were trying to wind down the interview, and I thought, I'll just ask him. And he told me all this stuff, it was great. But he told me a nationalist will take nationalism out of Manas, but a Muslim's faith, and he used the word iman, will be strengthened by reading it. And he didn't actually believe that Manas was real. He thought that this is just a story, it's a legend, you know, it's nothing historical about it, but he nevertheless linked it very closely with his faith. The head of the Akshum Karkut, which is a nationalist youth organization, told me that there was a synthesis of Islam and Kyrgyz traditions. That synthesis was accepted by our ancestors, and the synthesis itself became the new tradition. And those folk elements in our epic Manas can never be considered as shirk, because the epic includes the values of our people, customs and traditions. So it's interesting that he's saying real Islam is the Islam that includes all of this stuff, whereas some of these other people might say, no, not so much. One Manashi that I spoke to told me that pure Quran is good, but today's Islam is a negative influence. It's destroying all of our traditions. Women have started wearing hijab, people are wearing Pakistani clothes, the number of mosques has grown in villages, mullahs are prohibiting crying and saying kashak, or mourning the dead, at funerals. Our ancestors accepted pure Islam. It didn't contradict our culture. And then, finally, another member of Akshum Kar, who also was a propagandist in the Ministry of Youth and also, interestingly, a member of Adab Bashati, which is an Islamic organization in some ways similar to the Muslim Brotherhood. He said, we shouldn't just hang the 7 principles of Manas on the wall, but it should work as a system. They could use the epic heroes for educational or mentoring purposes. The ideology of the Manas epics heroes is a treasure for us. If it is God's will, we will work on this. So we can kind of see the different ways in which people from different aspects and different quarters of Kyrgyz society are conceptualizing Manas, and it overlaps in some ways, but they also see it in very different ways as well. Here's some Manashis. This is actually in the museum devoted to the mass repressions at Atabey Mazar. Again, you can, I just like this picture because it brings together sort of the Kyrgyz national tradition in its most dynamic sense. Someone's actually singing Manas. Chingiz Aymatov, I don't think he's actually buried under the floor there, but that is at least a headstone commemorating him. Of course, he's the great Kyrgyz national writer, and at this place where people were coming to pray and read the Quran for the souls of people who were killed in the 1930s. So this picture kind of brings it all together. And these people here off on the corners are actually shaykhs of different mazars who had come along as well. So, getting back to the original question, what does it mean when we say to be Kyrgyz means to be Muslim? Well, I was interviewing 2 young women who had graduated from a madrasa, an Islamic school that was run by Tablighi Jama'at. They were very conservative, they were wrapped in headscarves. It was very difficult to actually get them to talk with me. And one of them said, I am proud to be Kyrgyz because it means I'm a Muslim, which superficially sounds a lot like to be Kyrgyz means being Muslim. But I think the way that it struck me was that she meant it in a very different sense than this kind of cultural or secular sense that is usually denoted by the phrase when we run across it in the literature. And I think that just brings to the fore the idea that history and culture, the state, and of course regular people, all of them play an active role in shaping religious and national identities. And these identities oftentimes interact in very interesting ways. So when I was in Karakol, I was interviewing the one person who actually agreed to talk with me there. He was a very old mullah, he was from Osh, and I was asking him about questions about Kyrgyz national identity and so forth. And he kept saying, there is no nationality in Islam. These are different things. I said, well, but you're wearing a kalpak. And he kind of looked at me and said, but no, there's a hadith, and the Prophet Muhammad said it's okay to be proud of which people you are and where you came from. And that's why I wear a kalpak. And I thought, well, that's very interesting, because he's taking 2 things that he says are completely disconnected, but he's finding a religious justification for having a national pride that he said in Islam shouldn't really exist anyways. So once again, I think that just sort of brings to the fore this idea that nations are zones of conflict, because sometimes the nationalists themselves or members of the nation don't even agree that they're part of the nation, but they still find ways of asserting that identity. The implications, I guess, to wrap things up, the religious sphere in Kyrgyzstan and in Central Asia more broadly is a lot more dynamic than is often recognized. Most of the people that I met were not lax cultural Muslims who enjoyed drinking vodka and eating pork. They took their religion very seriously, to different degrees and in different ways, but they were all very self-consciously Muslims, and in many cases they made self-consciously Islamic arguments to back up the things that they said. The religious sphere is not socially isolated. It's implicated in all parts of Kyrgyz society. In the economy, there are many Islamic banks popping up all over. There are lots of Islamic schools. Obviously, morality and ethics are shaped by the rise of more public Islam. And of course, as we've talked about, national identity. So I think all of this kind of points to the need, to move beyond, on the one hand, narratives of extremism and terrorism and all this, but at the same time to resist this opposite tendency to try to rescue Central Asians from being called extremists by kind of writing them off as lax or heterodox or don't take their religion very seriously, because at least in my experience, a lot of people take their religion very seriously. So I'd like to first thank the IREX organization for funding my trip. Without them, it wouldn't have been possible. I'd like to thank the Central Asian Studies Institute at American University for sort of giving me a home. I'd like to thank Syria and the Central Asian Institute for inviting me to be here, and of course the research participants, because I wouldn't have learned anything if they hadn't helped me. And this woman, this was at the Baitik Batir Mazar, and she came back and started praying, and that stone is written all in Arabic. So anyway, I guess we can wrap things up. Time for discussion.
Thank you, Vincent.